The transport ship hummed as it approached the crystalline spires of Virelia's royal palace. Daniel Reeve stood at the viewport, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, eyes reflecting the prismatic light of the three moons. His plain gray uniform bore a single patch, Earth Maintenance Corps, and a small broom insignia that the Virelian officials had insisted upon, a reminder of humanity's place in the galactic hierarchy. "Maintenance Technician Reeve," the automated voice announced. "Prepare for docking procedures. Royal Palace protocols initiated." Daniel nodded silently, his expression revealing nothing as he shouldered his duffel bag. It contained little: some clothes, basic toiletries, a worn notebook, and a small wooden box his grandfather had given him. Nothing that would raise suspicion. Nothing that would suggest he was anything but what his papers claimed. A janitor sent as part of Earth's mandatory support services to their gracious allies in the Galactic Confederation. The ship docked with a soft hiss. When the airlock opened, two tall, silver-skinned Virelians awaited him, their iridescent robes shimmering in the artificial light. "Human," the taller one said, not bothering with a name. "Follow." Daniel kept his eyes down, his posture slightly stooped, the universal body language of the unimportant. As they led him through gleaming corridors, he carefully noted each turn, each security checkpoint, each surveillance node embedded in the crystalline walls. His pencil would record it all later, in what appeared to be nothing more than a maintenance log. The palace was everything Earth's briefings had described, a marvel of biotechnology and ancient tradition. Living crystal grew in perfect geometric patterns, pulsing with an inner light that seemed to respond to the emotions of those who walked its halls. The Virelians, with their telepathic abilities, had built their civilization on the connection between mind and matter. Their architecture reflected their conviction of superiority, beautiful, perfect, and utterly inhospitable to those not born to their kind. Daniel was brought to a small anteroom where a royal administrator awaited. The Virelian woman's skin had a bluish tint that marked her as part of the ruling caste. Her eyes, entirely silver with no visible pupil, regarded Daniel with the casual disinterest one might show a household appliance. "Human, Daniel Reeve," she said, consulting a translucent tablet. "Earth has sent you for maintenance duties in the royal palace of Her Luminance, Queen Solari the Infinite." She paused, studying him. "Do you understand the honor your species has been granted?" "Yes, Administrator," Daniel replied, his voice quiet and respectful. "Earth is grateful for the opportunity to serve." The administrator's lip curled slightly. "Indeed. You will be assigned to the Hall of Ancestral Relics. It houses our most sacred historical artifacts, many of which predate your species' discovery of fire." She handed him a crystalline keycard. "Your quarters are in the service wing. You will begin tomorrow at first light. Do not touch any artifact without explicit permission. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make eye contact with royal personages." Daniel finished, then immediately lowered his gaze. "Forgive me. My briefing was thorough." The administrator's eyes narrowed slightly, but she continued. "Your Earth supervisors claim you have some technical aptitude. Should you encounter any maintenance issues beyond your capabilities, report them to the hall supervisor. Do not attempt repairs on systems you do not understand." "Of course, Administrator." "Very well. Tezen will show you to your quarters." As Daniel was led away, he caught a glimpse of a grand hallway where elegantly dressed Virelians were gathering. At its end stood an ornate doorway flanked by guards in ceremonial armor. Beyond it, he knew, lay the throne room of Queen Solari, exactly where he needed to be. His quarters were as expected, small, functional, and isolated from the Virelian living areas. A sleeping pod, a sanitation unit, and a small desk. No windows. The message was clear: out of sight when not needed. When finally alone, Daniel stood straight, the stoop vanishing from his posture. He removed a small device from the heel of his boot and swept the room for surveillance. Finding none, the Varelians considered direct monitoring of servants beneath them. He took out his notebook. In precise handwriting, he began mapping the palace corridors, noting guard rotations, and recording observations about the various officials he'd encountered. In the margins, he sketched small diagrams of security systems, ventilation ducts, and power conduits. At the very back of the notebook, sealed between 2 pages, was a faded photograph of a military unit. 12 men and women in battle armor, standing before a dropship. Daniel ran his finger across the faces, pausing on a tall woman with captain's insignia and a confident smile. He flipped the photo over, written on the back in faded ink, "Project Clean Sweep, never forget." He carefully resealed the photograph and put the notebook away. Then, from the wooden box, he took out a small metal charm, a miniature broom, and placed it under his pillow. "Not yet, Solari," he whispered to the empty room. "Not yet." The hall of ancestral relics sprawled across the eastern wing of the palace. A vast cathedral-like space with soaring ceilings and display cases that seemed to float in midair. Artifacts from 20,000 years of Varelian history hovered on anti-gravity pedestals or rested in climate-controlled chambers. Ancient weapons, ceremonial garments, technological marvels from past ages, all preserved with reverent care. The hall supervisor, a thin Varelian named Kasrin, barely acknowledged Daniel's presence as he thrust a cleaning kit into his hands. "Begin at the north end and work south," Kasrin instructed. "Use only the approved cleaning solutions. The floors must be polished to a mirror finish. The display cases require special attention. Fingerprints are unacceptable. You will work until the evening bell. Questions?" Daniel shook his head. "Good. Remember your place. Human. These artifacts are the soul of Virelia. You are merely dust to be swept away." With that encouraging introduction, Daniel was left alone among the relics of a civilization that considered his entire species barely worthy of notice. He began methodically, starting with the floors as instructed. The special mop and polish created a surface so reflective that the artifacts seemed to exist in 2 worlds, one above and one below. Daniel worked with careful precision, his movements economical and practiced. As he cleaned, he observed each artifact, each description, each security measure. He paid particular attention to a section cordoned off by a subtle energy barrier. According to the plaque, it contained relics from the Purification Wars, conflicts that had occurred over a millennium ago when the Varelians had supposedly cleansed their society of primitive elements. Around midday, the hall began to fill with visitors, noble Varelians conducting tours for off-world dignitaries. Daniel made himself invisible, continuing his work without interruption, becoming part of the background like the surveillance systems he'd carefully mapped. "And here," a pompous voice announced, "we have the Ascendant Glider, a personal transport used by Emperor Vazin during the Third Dynasty." Daniel glanced up briefly. A group of officials had gathered around a tarnished metallic object that resembled a cross between a motorcycle and a manta ray. Its once sleek surface was dulled with age, and several components hung loose from its undercarriage. "It no longer functions, of course," the tour guide continued. "The propulsion system relied on a psycho-reactive interface that died with the Emperor. Our scientists have been unable to recreate the technology, despite centuries of study." Daniel continued polishing the floor, moving closer to the display. From his angle, he could see underneath the ancient vehicle. Something caught his eye, a simple disconnection in what appeared to be the main power coupling. As he moved his mop under the display pedestal, he noticed other issues: corroded connectors, misaligned stabilizers, a cracked energy cell that could easily be bypassed. "Fixable problems, simple problems." He returned to his regular cleaning pattern, making mental notes. That evening, after completing his assigned sections, he approached Kasrin. "Supervisor," he said respectfully, "I noticed the Ascendant glider appears to have some loose components. Would it be appropriate for me to secure them as part of the maintenance?" Kazrin looked surprised that the human had spoken at all. "The relics are not your concern beyond cleaning their displays." "Of course, I only thought—" "You are not here to think, human. You are here to clean. Return to your quarters until tomorrow." Daniel nodded and retreated. But as he walked through the now empty hall, he paused by the glider display. No one was watching. The security cameras in this section focused on the entries and exits, not on the displays themselves, a fact he had confirmed during his careful cleaning of the camera lenses. He set down his cleaning supplies and reached into his pocket, retrieving a small roll of electrical tape and a multi-tool he'd smuggled in from his maintenance kit. With quick, practiced movements, he slipped behind the display and reached underneath the ancient vehicle. 10 minutes later, he gathered his cleaning supplies and left. Nothing appeared different about the glider, except for a few strategically placed pieces of tape and a power coupling that now completed a circuit that had been broken for centuries. The next morning, chaos greeted Daniel when he arrived at the Hall of Relics. A crowd of Varelian officials surrounded the Ascendant glider display, their silver eyes wide with shock. The ancient vehicle was humming with energy, its surface gleaming with renewed luster, and the control panel glowing with soft blue light. "Impossible," one official was saying. "The interface died with Emperor Vazin." "Could it be responding to her luminance's presence in the palace?" another suggested. "Perhaps the royal bloodline." Daniel quietly picked up his mop and began cleaning a far corner of the hall, his face betraying nothing. Kazrin was too busy dealing with the commotion to assign him duties, so he continued his methodical work, gradually making his way closer to the excitement. "Perhaps," a new voice suggested, "we should examine it more closely." The crowd parted, and Daniel caught his first glimpse of High Chancellor Vareth, tall, even for a Varelian, with skin that gleamed like burnished platinum. Vareth moved with the confidence of absolute authority. His ceremonial armor, worn despite his primarily political role, clinked softly as he approached the glider. "This is a significant development," Vareth said, running a long-fingered hand over the glider's controls. "Her luminance will want to be informed immediately." "Of course, High Chancellor," Kazrin said, bowing deeply. "Shall I summon the royal technicians?" "Not yet. I wish to examine it personally first." Vareth turned to the assembled officials. "Return to your duties. I will handle this matter." As the crowd dispersed, Daniel continued cleaning nearby, invisible in his janitorial role. He watched as Vareth leaned close to the glider, his expression changing from official concern to something more calculating. The High Chancellor pressed a sequence on the control panel, then frowned when nothing happened. "You," Vareth suddenly called, looking directly at Daniel. "Human, bring your cleaning supplies closer. There appears to be dust on the control panel." Daniel approached with appropriate deference, head bowed. "Yes, High Chancellor." "Clean it thoroughly. I wish to see all the markings clearly." Daniel set to work, carefully wiping the ancient controls while Vareth watched intently. From this proximity, Daniel could see what the Chancellor was attempting, trying to access a hidden compartment in the glider's chassis. A compartment that, according to the historical records Daniel had studied, might contain the Emperor's personal communication device. "The symbols appear to be arranged in a specific pattern," Daniel ventured quietly as he cleaned. Vareth stiffened. "I did not ask for your observations. Human—" "Forgive me," Daniel continued cleaning, then added, "It's only that in my maintenance training, we studied ancient control patterns. This arrangement suggests a 3-part authentication sequence, rather than a direct access code." Vareth's silver eyes narrowed. "Explain." Daniel pointed with his cloth to 3 distinct symbols. "In Earth's ancient vehicles, Similar patterns would indicate that these primary nodes need to be activated in sequence, followed by a confirmation gesture. He kept his tone deferential, as if offering an insignificant observation. Vareth studied the panel silently, then placed his fingers on the symbols Daniel had indicated. When he pressed them in sequence and then swept his hand across the panel, a soft click emanated from the glider, and a small compartment slid open in its side. The High Chancellor's eyes widened fractionally, the Virelian equivalent of astonishment. He reached into the compartment and withdrew a small crystalline device. "You have been useful, human," Vareth said, pocketing the device. "Return to your duties and speak of this to no one." "Of course, High Chancellor." As Vareth strode away, Daniel resumed his cleaning, his expression neutral. But his mind catalogued everything: Vareth's intensity, his secretiveness, his willingness to pocket an ancient royal artifact without documentation or witnesses. Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel established a routine. He arrived early, cleaned meticulously, observed everything, and returned to his quarters to document his findings. The Virelians quickly grew accustomed to his presence, which meant they began to ignore him entirely, the perfect condition for his purposes. He discovered that the palace was riddled with ancient access tunnels, maintenance ducts, and forgotten passageways, none of which appeared on the official schematics. By accidentally dropping cleaning supplies and retrieving them from ventilation grates, or polishing obscure corners where hidden panels were located, he gradually assembled a complete map of the palace's hidden infrastructure. One evening, while cleaning near the administrative offices adjacent to the Hall of Relics, Daniel overheard a heated conversation. He recognized Vareth's distinctive voice, along with someone speaking in the harsh, clicking language of the Kreslor, a species known for their mercenary activities. Payment will be transferred upon completion, not before," Vareth was saying, his voice low but intense. "The Kreslor require assurance," the other voice responded. "This operation carries significant risk. Your people will receive half now, half upon completion. That is my final offer." Daniel continued mopping, moving slowly away from the door to avoid suspicion, but keeping within earshot. "And the human contingent?" the Kreslor asked. "Our intelligence suggests Earth's ambassador arrives next week." "A minor complication," Vareth dismissed. "Their delegation will be contained. In fact, their presence provides useful cover. Initial evidence will implicate Earth's government in the regrettable events." "Very well. The Kreslor accept your terms. We will be in position by the third moonrise." Daniel heard movement and quickly focused on cleaning a particularly spotless section of floor. The door opened, and Vareth emerged, followed by a cloaked figure whose scaled hands and multiple eyes marked him as Kreslor. They walked past Daniel without a glance, continuing their conversation in hushed tones. Once they were gone, Daniel retrieved a cloth that he had intentionally saturated with cleaning solution and placed against the door's edge. The liquid had seeped under the door, creating a small puddle inside the office, a reason for him to enter and clean it up. Inside, he quickly wiped up the spill, but also noted a star chart displayed on a wall screen with several planetary systems highlighted. He recognized the pattern immediately: key military outposts along the borders between Virelian and Earth-controlled space. That night, in his quarters, Daniel added this information to his growing collection. The picture was becoming clearer, but he needed more. He needed access to the inner palace, to Queen Solari herself. His opportunity came sooner than expected. The following day, a palace-wide announcement declared that Queen Solari would be conducting a formal inspection of the Hall of Ancestral Relics. The hall staff erupted into frantic preparation. Displays were recalibrated, security was enhanced, and cleaning protocols were doubled. "You," Catherine snapped at Daniel, "will ensure the central chamber is immaculate. Her luminance will be conducting a ceremonial viewing of the eternal flame." "Yes, Supervisor," Daniel replied, accepting the special polishing equipment Catherine thrust at him. The central chamber housed the Varelians' most sacred relic, a flame that supposedly had burned continuously since their civilization's founding. Housed in a crystalline containment field, the blue-white fire danced and twisted in mesmerizing patterns, responding to the collective emotional state of the Varelians present. Daniel worked methodically, aware that this assignment placed him in the exact location he needed to be. As he polished the intricate floor patterns surrounding the flame's pedestal, he noticed a small irregularity in the security field, a fluctuation that occurred at precise intervals of 108 seconds. By midday, the hall had been cleared of all personnel except essential security. Daniel was permitted to remain only because the final polishing was deemed necessary, and there was no time to train another cleaner on the specialized techniques required. "Remain in the outer ring," the head of security instructed him. "Once her luminance enters, you will exit immediately through the service door. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," Daniel said, keeping his eyes downcast. At precisely the appointed hour, a melodic tone echoed through the hall, signaling the Queen's approach. Daniel continued his polishing, working his way toward the service door as instructed. But as the grand entrance began to open, he deliberately knocked over his container of polish, sending the specialized solution spreading across the floor directly in the path the Queen would take. Chaos erupted. Security personnel rushed forward, communicating urgently through their neural links. Daniel immediately dropped to his knees, frantically trying to clean up the spill, appearing both terrified and dedicated to fixing his mistake. "Stop all movement!" commanded the security chief. "Her luminance approaches!" Too late. The doors had fully opened, and Queen Solari stood at the threshold, surrounded by her retinue. She was taller than any Varelian Daniel had seen, her silver skin almost luminous, with patterns of light shifting beneath its surface. Her eyes were not the solid silver of other Varelians, but had rings of blue that seemed to evaluate everything they saw on multiple levels. She took in the scene with a single glance: the spilled polish, the frantic human, the alarmed security personnel. "What occurs here?" Her voice was melodic but carried unmistakable authority. "Your luminance," the security chief said, bowing deeply. "A regrettable accident. The human cleaner has spilled—" "I can see what has happened," Solari interrupted, her gaze fixed on Daniel, who had frozen in his cleaning efforts and was now kneeling with his head bowed. "Human. Look at me." Daniel slowly raised his eyes, careful to maintain an expression of appropriate fear and respect, while meeting her gaze directly, something no servant would normally dare. For a long moment, Solari studied him, her head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear. Daniel felt a subtle pressure against his consciousness, a telepathic touch, light but insistent. He allowed her to sense his surface thoughts, anxiety over his mistake, determination to correct it, concern about punishment, while keeping his deeper mind shielded behind mental techniques that had been implanted years ago, specifically designed to resist Varelian telepathy. "You are thorough in your work," Solari finally said, her tone neutral. "I try to be, your luminance," Daniel replied softly. "Yet accidents occur." "Yes, your luminance. I apologize deeply for this disruption." Solari made a gesture, and her attendants moved back slightly. To everyone's surprise, she stepped forward, navigating around the spill with graceful precision. "Continue your cleaning," she instructed Daniel. "I will proceed with the viewing." As Solari moved toward the eternal flame, Daniel resumed his work, aware that he had accomplished his objective: direct contact with the Queen. More importantly, he had experienced her telepathic probe and confirmed that his mental shields were effective. Throughout the ceremony, as he diligently cleaned the spill and then retreated to the service area, he felt Solari's attention return to him several times. Each time, he projected nothing but the thoughts of a dedicated servant, while observing everything about her and her entourage. especially the way High Chancellor Verith watched her with calculating eyes when he thought no one was looking. That evening, Daniel was summoned not to the supervisor's office as expected, perhaps for discipline, but to the administrative center of the palace. He was led to a small meeting room where, to his surprise, Queen Solari awaited, accompanied only by a single guard and a royal attendant. "Leave us," she instructed them after Daniel was brought in. When they hesitated, her tone hardened. "The human poses no threat. Wait outside." When they were alone, Solari circled Daniel slowly, her ceremonial robes whispering against the polished floor. "You are not what you appear to be," she said finally. Daniel remained silent, his posture respectful but not subservient. "Your mind has barriers," she continued. "Sophisticated ones. No simple maintenance worker possesses such defenses. Perhaps Earth has evolved since your last evaluation of our species," Daniel suggested mildly. A flicker of what might have been amusement crossed Solari's face. "Perhaps, or perhaps Earth has sent me something more interesting than a cleaner." She stopped directly in front of him. "Why are you here, Daniel Reeve?" "To maintain the Hall of Relics, as assigned." "And yet you repaired the Ascendant glider, a feat our engineers could not accomplish in centuries. You assisted the High Chancellor in accessing Emperor Vazin's communication device. You have cleaned my palace more thoroughly than any servant before you." Her eyes narrowed. "You have mapped my home with remarkable precision." Daniel tensed slightly. She had been monitoring him more closely than he'd realized. "I'm thorough in my work," he repeated his earlier statement. "Indeed." Solari moved to a wall panel and pressed her palm against it. A hidden compartment opened, revealing Daniel's notebook, the one he kept in his quarters. "Thorough enough to document every corridor, every security measure, every official in my court." She opened the notebook, displaying pages of Daniel's precise diagrams and notes. "This is not the work of a cleaner, human." Daniel remained silent, calculating his options. Denial would be pointless. Violence, unproductive. "I serve Earth's interests," he said finally. "As do you, in your way." "Explain." "Earth and Virelia are allies, on paper. Yet your military vessels have been positioning themselves along our border worlds. Your diplomats delay crucial trade negotiations. And your High Chancellor meets with Kreslor mercenaries to discuss operations that would frame Earth for some regrettable event." Solari's expression didn't change, but the patterns of light beneath her skin shifted rapidly, the Virelian equivalent of intense thought. "You claim Verith conspires against Earth?" "Not just Earth," Daniel said quietly. "The star charts in his office mark both Earth and Virelian positions. The regrettable event he plans involves your security as well. Your luminance." Solari placed the notebook on a small table. "You make serious accusations against my most trusted advisor, based on fragments of overheard conversation and stolen glances at documents you cannot possibly understand." "I understand enough," Daniel replied, "and I can prove Verith's treachery, if you'll allow me a test." "A test?" Solari's tone was skeptical, but Daniel could see he had captured her interest. "The challenge of dignity," he said. "An ancient Virelian tradition where a ruler tests a subject's loyalty and wisdom through a series of tasks." Surprise registered briefly in Solari's eyes. "You know our traditions well for a human janitor." "Earth's briefings were thorough," Daniel said with the ghost of a smile. Solari considered him for a long moment. "Very well. I will grant you this challenge of dignity. 3 tasks to prove your claims and your worth." Her eyes hardened. "But be warned, human, if you fail, or if your accusations against Verith prove false, the penalty is execution." "I understand. Your luminance. Your first task will be presented tomorrow. Return to your quarters and prepare yourself." She gestured toward the door, then added, "I will keep this notebook for now." Daniel bowed slightly. "As you wish, your luminance." As he turned to leave, Solari spoke once more. "Daniel Reeve, one question before you go. He paused, looking back at her. The tasks in the challenge of dignity are traditionally chosen by the subject, not the ruler. What would you choose as your first task? Daniel answered without hesitation. To clean the throne room floor, Your Luminance, thoroughly. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed Solari's face, followed by something that might almost have been amusement. An unusual choice. Sometimes the simplest tasks reveal the most truth. Indeed, Solari nodded slowly. The throne room floor it shall be, tomorrow at first light. The throne room of Queen Solari was the heart of Virelian power, a vast chamber with soaring crystalline columns and a ceiling that seemed to capture and amplify the light of the three moons. The throne itself was carved from a single piece of living crystal that responded to the emotions of the rightful ruler, glowing with different colors to reflect the monarch's state of mind. When Daniel arrived the next morning, the room was filled with court officials, military officers, and planetary dignitaries, all gathered to witness the unprecedented spectacle of a human being subjected to the challenge of dignity. High Chancellor Vareth stood at Solari's right hand, his expression a careful mask of diplomatic interest, concealing obvious disdain. "Approach, human," Solari commanded from her throne, which pulsed with a cool blue light. Daniel walked forward, dressed in his simple maintenance uniform, carrying his cleaning supplies. Murmurs and barely suppressed laughter rippled through the assembled Virelian nobility. "Daniel Reeve of Earth has requested the challenge of dignity," Solari announced formally. "His first task, chosen by himself, is to clean the throne room floor." The murmurs grew louder, tinged with disbelief and mockery. Even Vareth's composed facade cracked slightly, revealing a smirk. "Your Luminance," the High Chancellor said smoothly. "Surely this is beneath the dignity of your court. The human mocks our sacred traditions." "Does he?" Solari replied, her gaze fixed on Daniel. "Or does he understand them better than you assume? The challenge of dignity has always been about revealing truth through action, not words." She gestured to Daniel. "Proceed with your task, human." Daniel bowed and set to work. He began methodically, starting from the far corner of the vast room, applying his cleaning solution in precise patterns and working the specialized mop with practiced efficiency. The court officials continued their mocking commentary, but Daniel ignored them, focusing entirely on his task. As he worked his way across the floor, he paid special attention to the area beneath the court officials' feet, forcing them to move aside as he cleaned. This subtle disruption of the court's standing positions, which were governed by strict protocols of rank and influence, created ripples of discomfort throughout the assembly. Gradually, Daniel's methodical progress brought him to the section of floor directly before the throne dais. Here, he slowed his pace, examining the intricate patterns inlaid in the crystalline surface. To the observers, he appeared to be ensuring a perfect finish. In reality, he was studying the subtle differences in the flooring, differences that confirmed what he had suspected from studying the palace's architectural history. Without looking up, he addressed the queen. "Your Luminance, with your permission, I need to apply a special solution to this section. The pattern work requires particular attention." "Proceed," Solari said, her voice revealing nothing. Daniel removed a small vial from his cleaning kit and applied a clear liquid to the floor. As it spread across the surface, the liquid began to glow faintly, revealing hairline seams that had been invisible before, the outline of a concealed access panel directly before the throne. A murmur of surprise rippled through the court. High Chancellor Vareth stepped forward, his composure slipping. "Your Luminance, the human tampers with sacred floor patterns. This is desecration." "Is it desecration to reveal what was always there?" "High Chancellor?" Daniel asked, still focused on his cleaning. "This access panel dates to the original construction of the palace, before the Third Dynasty's renovations." Solari leaned forward slightly, her throne shifting from blue to a curious amber. Explain. Human. The historical archives mention that Emperor Vazin ordered extensive modifications to the palace during the Third Dynasty, Daniel said, continuing to work as he spoke. What they don't mention is that these modifications included secret passages, a network allowing trusted agents to move throughout the palace unseen. He looked up directly at Vareth. Or allowing assassins access to the throne room. Vareth's face hardened. Baseless speculation. Your luminance. This human spreads dangerous misinformation. Then, you won't mind if I complete my cleaning, Daniel said mildly, applying more of the solution to the floor. The hidden seams glowed brighter, and now, even the court officials could clearly see the outline of a large access panel. Enough! Vareth snapped, his hand moving to the ceremonial weapon at his belt. Stand down, High Chancellor, Solari commanded, her throne now pulsing with a deep purple light. Let the human finish his task. Daniel set aside his cleaning supplies and placed his hands on specific points along the glowing seams. With practiced pressure, he pressed downward and twisted slightly. There was a soft click, and the panel depressed slightly. This access tunnel, Daniel said, looking directly at Solari, connects to a network that runs throughout the palace. According to my research, the blueprints for these passages were purged from official records during the Third Dynasty. Only those directly involved in their construction would know of their existence. He paused. Or those who discovered the original plans in Emperor Vazin's communication device, the one the High Chancellor accessed 2 weeks ago with my assistance. All eyes turned to Vareth, whose face had gone completely still. Your luminance, Vareth said, his voice tight. This human creates elaborate fictions. The access panel is likely a maintenance feature. Nothing more. Then you won't object to us opening it to see where it leads, Daniel suggested. Before Vareth could respond, Daniel pressed down firmly on the panel. With a soft hiss, it slid aside, revealing a dark passage below. From his pocket, Daniel took a small light and shone it into the opening, illuminating a tunnel that sloped gently downward. This passage, he said, leads directly to the private quarters of the High Chancellor. I mapped it last night while everyone slept. The court erupted in shocked exclamations. Vareth's hand flew to his weapon, but before he could draw it, royal guards stepped forward, responding to a subtle signal from Solari. High Chancellor, the Queen said, her voice dangerously calm. You seem disturbed by the human's revelations. Your luminance, Vareth replied, struggling to maintain his composure. I am disturbed only by the breach of security this represents. These passages were sealed for good reason. They are a vulnerability in palace defenses. A vulnerability known only to those with access to Emperor Vazin's communication device. Daniel pointed out. The device you took without official documentation or witnesses. Solari's eyes narrowed. Is this true, Vareth? The device contained historical records of interest to our scholars, Vareth said smoothly. I secured it for proper study. Yet no record of this proper study exists in the palace archives, Daniel said. I checked. Vareth's expression darkened. You overstep, human. Your task was to clean the floor, not to make accusations against a high official of the Varelian court. I have cleaned the floor. High Chancellor, Daniel replied, gesturing to the immaculate surface surrounding the open panel. And in doing so, I have revealed hidden truths, exactly as the challenge of dignity demands. Solari rose from her throne, which now pulsed with a deep red light. The human speaks correctly. The first task is complete. She turned to Daniel. You have proven more thorough than expected. The court will reconvene tomorrow for your second task. As the court officials began to disperse, murmuring amongst themselves, Solari added, Secure the passage and post guards. No one is to enter or exit the palace through any unauthorized route. Vareth bowed stiffly. As you command, your luminance. As Daniel gathered his cleaning supplies, he felt Vareth's gaze boring into him, cold and calculating. The High Chancellor's plans had been disrupted, but not destroyed. And now, Daniel had made himself a very visible target. Precisely as intended. That evening, Daniel was escorted not to his quarters, but to a secure meeting room adjacent to the royal apartments. Queen Solari awaited him, accompanied by her most trusted security advisors and military commanders. His notebook lay open on the table before her. "Your revelations have caused considerable disruption in my court," Solari said, without preamble when they were alone. "Disruption often precedes truth, Your Luminance." Solari's lips quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Indeed," she gestured to the notebook. "You've documented far more than secret passages. Military deployments, diplomatic communications, security protocols, information that could be considered espionage under our laws. Information that reveals a pattern," Daniel countered. "Virelian military vessels repositioning near Earth colonies, diplomatic channels being quietly closed, resources being diverted to weapons development, and at the center of it all, High Chancellor Vareth." "You make a compelling case for concern," Solari acknowledged, "but not yet for treachery. Vareth has served the throne for decades. His loyalty has never been questioned." "The most dangerous traitors are those above suspicion," Daniel said quietly. Solari studied him for a long moment. "What is your true purpose here, Daniel Reeve? You are clearly no ordinary maintenance worker. Are you an Earth intelligence operative?" "I serve Earth's interests," Daniel repeated his earlier statement. "But my primary goal is to prevent a conflict that would devastate both our worlds." "Noble sentiments," Solari said, her tone skeptical. "Yet you've infiltrated my palace under false pretenses, gathered sensitive information, and disrupted my court. Sometimes preventing catastrophe requires unconventional methods. Perhaps—" Solari closed the notebook. "Tomorrow you will face your second challenge. Vareth has requested it take the form of the Royal Command Strategy, a tactical simulation used to test our military officers." Daniel nodded, unsurprised. "A test of intelligence rather than diligence." "Precisely. The simulation is notoriously complex. Most officers require months of preparation to complete it successfully." Her eyes met his directly. "You will have one attempt, with no preparation." "I understand." "Do you?" Solari leaned forward slightly. "Vareth excels at the simulation. He holds the palace record for fastest completion, 27 steps to achieve victory." "An impressive achievement," Daniel acknowledged. "Indeed. The simulation will be witnessed by the full court, including my military command. If you fail, or if you succeed but cannot prove your allegations against Vareth, you will be executed for espionage." "And if I succeed and prove Vareth's treachery?" Solari's expression hardened. "Then justice will be served, regardless of rank or past service." "Fair enough." Daniel rose to leave, then paused. "One question. Your Luminance. Why grant me this challenge at all? You could have simply executed me as a spy when you found my notebook." Solari was silent for a moment, the patterns beneath her skin shifting in complex rhythms. "Because sometimes," she said finally, "truth comes from unexpected sources, and a wise ruler listens before deciding." Daniel bowed slightly. "Until tomorrow, then." As he was escorted back to his quarters, now under heavy guard, Daniel knew that Vareth would make his move soon. The High Chancellor couldn't afford to wait for the simulation, not with his secrets beginning to unravel. The question was no longer if an attack would come, but when. Daniel smiled grimly in the darkness of his room. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The Royal Command Strategy simulation took place in the palace's ancient war room, a hexagonal chamber with walls of living crystal that could project three-dimensional tactical displays. When Daniel was led in, the room was already filled with Virelian military officers, court officials, and royal advisors. High Chancellor Vareth stood on a raised platform beside a control console, his ceremonial armor gleaming under the chamber's lights. Queen Solari entered last, taking her place on a throne-like seat overlooking the central simulation area. Her expression was unreadable, but the living crystal of her seat pulsed with a deep amber light, indicating focused attention. "Daniel Reeve of Earth," she announced formally. "Your second task in the Challenge of Dignity is to complete the Royal Command Strategy simulation. High Chancellor Vareth will oversee the challenge." Vareth stepped forward, his smile coldly triumphant. "The simulation represents a historical military engagement from the Purification Wars," he explained, his voice carrying throughout the chamber. "You will command the defending forces against a superior enemy. Victory conditions require you to preserve the royal city while defeating the invading force." With a gesture, Vareth activated the simulation. The crystal walls shimmered and then projected a detailed three-dimensional landscape. A coastal city surrounded by mountains on one side and a vast ocean on the other. Tiny, holographic ships approached from the sea, while ground forces massed in the mountain passes. "The simulation is calibrated to the highest difficulty," Vareth continued. "You have limited resources, incomplete intelligence, and must contend with both military and civilian considerations." He gestured to a control podium in the center of the room. "Your command interface. You may begin when ready." Daniel approached the podium, slowly, studying the projected battlefield from all angles. The interface was complex, designed for Varelian neural connections rather than human manual control. But Daniel had studied similar systems extensively during his preparation. "The historical context of this battle?" he asked calmly. Vareth raised an eyebrow. "The siege of Luminous Harbor. During the final years of the Purification Wars, the royal forces were outnumbered 3-1 by the revolutionary faction." Daniel nodded, continuing to study the simulation. "And the victory conditions again?" "Preserve the royal city and defeat the invading force," Vareth repeated, a hint of impatience in his tone. A task that historically required 43 strategic maneuvers over a 9-day engagement. "I see." Daniel placed his hands on the control interface. "And your record is 27 steps?" Vareth's eyes narrowed slightly. "Correct." "Impressive." Daniel activated the interface, and the holographic landscape came to life, with troop movements and resource indicators appearing around the edges of the display. But unnecessary. Before Vareth could respond, Daniel began inputting commands, rapidly and with absolute precision. The court watched in stunned silence as he rearranged the defensive forces, redirected supply lines, and repositioned artillery units in a pattern that made no apparent sense. "What strategy is this?" one of the military commanders demanded. "He weakens the harbor defenses and exposes the city's northern flank." "Patience, Commander," Solari said, her eyes fixed on Daniel's movements. Within minutes, Daniel had completely reconfigured the defensive posture. Then, instead of engaging the approaching enemy forces, he activated a sequence that caused the holographic tide to recede dramatically from the harbor. "What are you doing?" Vareth asked, his composure slipping. "The tide controls are environmental factors, not tactical options. History is written by the victors." "High Chancellor," Daniel replied without looking up. "But geography doesn't lie." With a final command, Daniel stepped back from the console. The simulation continued to run, showing the enemy fleet advancing into the now shallow harbor. As they reached the midpoint, Daniel's repositioned artillery opened fire, not on the ships, but on the surrounding cliffs. Massive landslides crashed down, blocking the retreat of the enemy vessels, just as the tide began to rush back in with unnatural speed. Simultaneously, the seemingly exposed northern flank of the city revealed hidden defensive positions that caught the ground forces in a devastating crossfire. The entire enemy army was trapped between the flooded harbor and the mountain passes, with no retreat possible. In 6 moves, the simulation showed total victory for the defending forces. The war room erupted in astonished exclamations. Vareth stared at the simulation results, his face a mask of disbelief. "Impossible," he whispered. "The simulation has never been completed in fewer than 20 steps." "Because everyone attempts to fight the battle as history recorded it," Daniel said, turning to face the court. "But historical accounts often omit crucial details, especially when those details contradict the preferred narrative." He gestured to the simulation, which was now showing the complete destruction of the enemy forces. The siege of Luminous Harbor wasn't a 9-day strategic masterpiece. It was a trap, one that used the harbor's unique tidal patterns and the unstable geology of the surrounding mountains to create a natural killing field. Daniel turned to Solari. "A brutal but effective strategy, one that your historical record sanitized into a more honorable, extended engagement, partly to conceal the devastating casualties, and partly to elevate the reputation of the commander who took credit for the victory." "And who was that commander?" Solari asked, her throne now pulsing with intense blue-white light. "According to the historical record, General Malvik of the Third Dynasty." Daniel's eyes shifted to Vareth. "The direct ancestor of our current High Chancellor." Vareth's face had gone completely still, the patterns beneath his skin frozen in place. "This is absurd. The humans somehow manipulated the simulation." "Did I?" Daniel stepped away from the console. "Run it again. Verify the parameters yourself." One of the military commanders stepped forward. "Your Luminance, I request permission to examine the simulation controls." Solari nodded. "Proceed, Commander Telsiv." Telsiv, a battle-hardened Virelian with facial markings indicating centuries of service, approached the console and began a thorough diagnostic. After several tense minutes, he looked up. "The simulation parameters are accurate and unchanged. Your Luminance, the human strategy is unorthodox but effective. The victory conditions have been met in 6 steps." Solari's gaze shifted from Telsiv to Daniel, then to Vareth. "It seems, High Chancellor, that our human guest has surpassed even your remarkable record." Vareth bowed stiffly. "A fortunate accident. The humans stumbled upon a solution through ignorance of our traditional approaches." "Or perhaps," Daniel suggested quietly, "through a willingness to question historical narratives that serve particular interests." The tension in the room was palpable. Solari rose from her throne, which now pulsed with a deep purple light. "The second task is complete. Daniel Reeve of Earth has succeeded beyond expectation." She surveyed the assembled court. "We will reconvene tomorrow for the final challenge." As the court began to disperse, Vareth approached Daniel, his voice pitched low, so only they could hear. "Impressive performance, human. But you've proven nothing except your talent for games." "The simulation isn't just a game, though, is it, High Chancellor?" Daniel replied softly. "It's a blueprint for the trap you're planning to spring on Earth's diplomatic delegation." Vareth's silver eyes widened fractionally, the only indication that Daniel's words had struck home. "I don't know what you mean," he said, his voice perfectly controlled. "The repositioning of your fleet, the strategic resources being moved to your colony worlds bordering Earth territory, the meetings with Kresler mercenaries." Daniel held Vareth's gaze steadily. "You're recreating the siege of Luminous Harbor, but with Earth's representatives as the target." For a brief moment, something cold and dangerous flashed in Vareth's eyes, a glimpse of the true personality behind the diplomatic mask. Then it was gone, replaced by practiced disdain. "You imagine conspiracies where none exist. Human. Perhaps that's why your kind remains so primitive. You see enemies in every shadow." "Not every shadow," Daniel said quietly. "Just the ones that move against the light." Vareth's lip curled slightly. "Enjoy your brief moment of favor, human. Tomorrow's challenge will not be so easily overcome." He turned and strode away, his ceremonial armor clinking softly with each step. Daniel watched him go, noting the subtle hand signal Vareth gave to one of his personal guards near the exit. The pieces were moving into position. The endgame was approaching, just as he had planned. Daniel wasn't surprised when the attack came that night. He had been returned to his quarters under guard, but he knew Vareth couldn't afford to wait until the third challenge. The High Chancellor's carefully constructed plans were unraveling too quickly. He was sitting on his sleeping pod, making notes in a replacement notebook, when he heard the soft hiss of the ventilation system changing its rhythm. Odorless gas, most likely, designed to incapacitate rather than kill. Vareth would want to interrogate him before disposing of the body. Daniel calmly reached into his boot and removed a small filter mask, pressing it over his nose and mouth. From beneath his mattress, he retrieved a metal rod that had once been part of his mop handle, now sharpened to a lethal point at one end. The door to his quarters slid open, and two figures entered, Varelian security officers wearing breathing apparatus. They moved with confident precision, clearly expecting to find an unconscious human. Instead, they found Daniel waiting in the center of the room, improvised weapon in hand. "Gentlemen," he said through the mask, "I believe you've taken a wrong turn." The officers hesitated. Then the taller one drew a stun baton. "Cooperate, human, and you won't be harmed. High Chancellor Vareth wishes to speak with you privately." "I'm sure he does." Daniel shifted his stance slightly, a subtle movement that would appear meaningless to most observers. But these weren't ordinary security officers. Their reaction, an immediate adjustment to combat posture, confirmed what Daniel had suspected. "You're not palace security," he said. "Krezlar mercenaries, interesting disguise." The officers exchanged glances, then simultaneously attacked. They were fast, well-trained, and armed with superior technology. But Daniel was ready. He dodged the first officer's stun baton, ducking under the swing and driving his sharpened mop handle into the breathing apparatus. As the device cracked, the Krezlar stumbled back, suddenly exposed to his own sedative gas. Daniel spun, using the disoriented mercenary as a shield against the second attacker's weapon. The fight was brief, but brutal. Despite their advanced technology, the Krezlars found themselves facing an opponent who had mapped every centimeter of the small room and who fought with a cold efficiency that belied his supposed background as a maintenance worker. Within minutes, both attackers lay unconscious on the floor. Daniel quickly bound them with strips torn from his bedding, then searched their bodies. As expected, they carried no identification, but their weapons and equipment were military grade, far beyond standard security issue. He checked the corridor outside his quarters. The regular guards were gone, probably reassigned by Vareth under some pretext. Daniel had perhaps 20 minutes before someone noticed the missing mercenaries. Time to accelerate the plan. Using the security override code he had memorized from his earlier observations, Daniel locked down his quarters from the outside, ensuring the unconscious Krezlars would remain contained. Then, he moved swiftly through the darkened palace corridors, avoiding the regular patrol routes he had carefully mapped during his weeks of cleaning. His destination, the ancient access tunnels beneath the throne room. If Vareth was making his move tonight, he would use those passages to bypass palace security. And if Daniel's intelligence was correct, the High Chancellor's plan involved more than just eliminating one troublesome human. As he navigated the shadowy corridors, Daniel reflected on how differently this operation had unfolded compared to his initial expectations. He had come to Varelia prepared for a straightforward intelligence-gathering mission: observe, document, and report back to Earth Security Council about Vareth's activities. Instead, he had found himself drawn into the complex political currents of the Varelian court, face to face with Queen Solari herself, and now racing to prevent what could become the spark for interstellar war. Daniel reached the maintenance access point he had identified during his earlier exploration, a service panel disguised as part of the decorative wall paneling. With practiced movements, He disengaged the locking mechanism and slipped into the narrow passage beyond. The access tunnels were dark and dusty, clearly unused for centuries except by Vareth and his conspirators. Daniel moved silently, guided by his memorized map and the faint emergency lighting that still functioned after millennia. As he descended deeper into the palace infrastructure, he heard voices echoing from ahead, Varelian, and the distinctive clicking speech of Kreslor's. He slowed his pace, moving with practiced stealth until he could see the source of the conversation. In a junction chamber, where several tunnels converged, High Chancellor Vareth stood surrounded by a dozen armed figures, half Varelian officers, half Kreslor mercenaries. A holographic display floated in the center of the group, showing a detailed schematic of the palace with several areas highlighted in pulsing red. "The human has complicated matters," Vareth was saying, his voice cold with controlled anger. "But the plan proceeds. Team 1 will secure the royal apartments. Team 2 will lock down the communication center. Once the Queen is isolated, the Kreslor ships will begin their approach, appearing to be Earth vessels attacking the palace." One of the Varelian officers spoke up. "And the Earth diplomatic delegation?" "Already contained," Vareth replied with satisfaction. "Their shuttle experienced an unfortunate navigation malfunction and has been redirected to the military detention facility. By the time we release them, they will face a Varelian population convinced that Earth has assassinated their queen." Daniel had heard enough. Vareth's plan was even more ambitious than he had suspected. Not just the elimination of Earth's diplomatic presence, but a full coup against Solari, disguised as an Earth attack to provide pretext for war. He needed to warn the Queen, but first, he needed weapons. Retreating silently from his observation point, Daniel made his way to another junction he had noted on his mental map, one that should connect to the palace armory through an ancient maintenance shaft. The shaft was narrower than he had anticipated, barely wide enough for his shoulders. Halfway through, he encountered a section where the ceiling had partially collapsed, forcing him to wriggle through on his stomach, pulling himself forward by his fingertips. As he emerged on the other side, covered in centuries of dust, Daniel found himself in a small access room adjacent to the armory proper. A security panel glowed softly on the wall, more advanced than the mechanical locks on the maintenance tunnels. Daniel examined it carefully, noting the neural interface designed for Varelian physiology. Not something he could bypass with simple mechanical skills. He would need to improvise. From his pocket, he took a small tool he had assembled from cleaning supplies, a conductive rod wrapped with wire salvaged from his quarters. Carefully, he removed the panel cover and studied the circuitry beneath. Varelian technology relied heavily on crystalline components that responded to their species' natural telepathic abilities. But, at its core, the system still operated on principles of energy flow and logic gates. Daniel identified the primary security circuit and, with delicate precision, inserted his makeshift tool to bridge specific connection points. The panel sparked briefly, then the door to the armory slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, racks of Varelian weapons lined the walls, everything from ceremonial blades to advanced energy weapons. Daniel moved quickly, selecting items that would be effective but inconspicuous. A compact stun projector that could be concealed in his palm, a defensive shield generator disguised as a wristband, and, most importantly, a communication device that could bypass the palace's normal channels. As he prepared to leave, Daniel noticed a display case at the far end of the armory. Inside was a weapon unlike the others, an ancient sword with a crystalline blade that seemed to shift colors as he approached. According to the description plate, it was the Blade of Clarity, a ceremonial weapon used in the Purification Wars, said to cut through deception as easily as flesh. Daniel hesitated, then broke the case and took the sword. Sometimes symbols were as powerful as technology. Armed and ready, he made his way back into the access tunnels, now moving with greater urgency. According to Vareth's timeline, The coup would begin within the hour. He needed to reach Queen Solari before the High Chancellor's forces secured the royal apartments. But as he approached the junction leading to the Queen's quarters, Daniel encountered an unexpected obstacle, a recently installed security field blocking the tunnel. Vareth had anticipated this route and taken precautions. Daniel studied the barrier. Attempting to disable it would likely trigger alarms. He needed another approach. Consulting his mental map, he identified an alternative route, a ventilation shaft that should connect to the ceremonial bathing chambers, adjacent to the royal apartments. It would be tight and potentially monitored, but it was his best option. The ventilation shaft was even narrower than the previous passage, forcing Daniel to remove his outer clothing to fit through. As he inched forward in the confined space, he reflected grimly on the irony. He had come to Virelia disguised as a maintenance worker, and now here he was, crawling through ductwork like a character in an old Earth action film. Finally, he reached a grate overlooking the ceremonial bathing chamber, a vast room of polished stone and flowing water, currently empty and dimly lit for the night cycle. Daniel carefully removed the grate and lowered himself silently to the floor. As he retrieved his hidden communicator to contact the Queen, a voice spoke from the shadows. "I wondered when you would arrive, human." Daniel spun, the ancient sword instantly in his hand, to find Queen Solari emerging from an alcove. She wore not her ceremonial robes, but a fitted combat suit, with what appeared to be personal shield generators at her wrists. "Your luminance," Daniel said, lowering the sword slightly. "The palace is compromised. Vareth is staging a coup. He plans to blame my assassination on Earth and use it as pretext for war," Solari finished calmly. "Yes, I am aware." Daniel stared at her. "You know, I have suspected Vareth's ambitions for some time," Solari said, moving closer. "What I lacked was proof and understanding of the full scope of his plan." Her silver blue eyes studied him intently. "Until you arrived. Then you knew who I was from the beginning?" "Not specifically, but I knew you were more than a simple maintenance worker." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "No one cleans that effectively without ulterior motives." Before Daniel could respond, the palace alarm system activated, a haunting, melodic tone that pulsed through the living crystal walls. "It's starting," Daniel said, tensing. "Vareth's forces will secure this section first." "Indeed." Solari moved to a wall panel and pressed her palm against it. A hidden compartment opened, revealing an array of weapons and communication devices. "Which is why we must reach the Sanctum Core before they cut off all access." "The Sanctum Core?" "The true heart of Virelian governance, and the only place from which I can activate the palace's ancient defense systems." Solari selected a weapon that resembled a slender wand. "Systems that even Vareth doesn't know exist." Daniel nodded. "Lead the way, your luminance." "Under the circumstances," Solari said with a raised eyebrow. "You may call me Solari." They moved swiftly through hidden passages that even Daniel's careful mapping hadn't revealed, routes known only to the royal lineage. As they navigated the complex network, Solari spoke in a low voice. "When did you realize Vareth's intentions?" "I suspected from the beginning," Daniel replied, keeping pace with her through a narrow corridor. Earth's intelligence services had detected unusual movement in Virelian military vessels near our border worlds. But we needed confirmation and details. "So they sent you, disguised as a janitor. The most invisible role in any hierarchy," Daniel said with a slight smile. "People reveal far more when they think no one important is watching." They paused at a junction as a patrol of armed guards ran past a connecting corridor. When the way was clear, Solari led them down a passage that sloped steeply downward, deep into the foundation of the palace. "And the challenge of dignity?" she asked as they descended. "Was that part of your plan?" "An improvisation," Daniel admitted. "When you discovered my notebook, I needed to maintain my position in the palace long enough to gather conclusive evidence of Vareth's conspiracy.
A dangerous gamble.
Less dangerous than interstellar war. Solari gave him an appraising look. Your dedication to your mission is admirable, but I sense there's more to your involvement than diplomatic concern. Before Daniel could respond, they reached a massive door of living crystal that pulsed with intricate patterns of light. Solari placed her palm against it, and the patterns reorganized themselves, flowing like liquid before the door silently slid open. Beyond lay the sanctum core, a spherical chamber whose walls were composed entirely of the living crystal that formed the basis of Varelian technology. At the center floated a complex geometric structure that seemed to shift and reconfigure itself continuously. The heart of Virelia, Solari explained, moving toward the central structure. From here, the first queens established our civilization's neural network, the foundation of our collective consciousness and technological advancement. Daniel followed her into the chamber, his trained eye noting the defensive capabilities built into the design: energy projection nodes, atmospheric control systems, and what appeared to be quantum entanglement communicators that could bypass conventional jamming. This is what Vareth truly wants, Solari continued, placing her hands on a control interface that materialized as she approached. Not just political power, but access to the collective memory, the accumulated knowledge and wisdom of 20,000 years of Varelian development. Knowledge that could give him military superiority over Earth, Daniel said, understanding dawning. Over the entire Galactic Confederation, Solari corrected. The Sanctum Core contains technological insights that we have deliberately withheld from other species, not out of malice, but because of their potential for devastation in the wrong hands. The central geometric structure pulsed with increasing intensity as Solari interfaced with it, streams of data flowing around her in complex patterns. Daniel moved to the entrance, keeping watch for pursuit. "How long until you can activate the defense systems?" he asked. "Minutes. The protocols require authentication that only the royal bloodline can provide." Solari's voice had taken on a distant quality as part of her consciousness merged with the core systems. Daniel checked his stolen weapons and prepared for the inevitable confrontation. Vareth would have realized by now that the Queen had escaped the initial sweep of the royal apartments. His forces would be converging on all possible secure locations, including, Daniel suspected, the Sanctum Core. As if confirming his thoughts, a distant explosion rumbled through the palace foundations, followed by the sound of weapons fire. The coup was in full swing, with Vareth's loyalists engaging the royal guards who remained faithful to Solari. "They're getting closer," Daniel warned. "I need more time," Solari replied, her focus still on the core interface. "The defense systems have been dormant for centuries. The reactivation sequence is complex." Daniel made a quick decision. "Keep working, I'll buy you time." Before Solari could respond, he slipped out of the Sanctum Core and sealed the door behind him. In the corridor outside, he could hear the approaching sounds of combat, energy weapons discharging, orders being shouted in Varelian, and the clicking language of the Kreslor mercenaries. Daniel assessed his position. The corridor leading to the Sanctum Core was narrow, a bottleneck where a single defender could potentially hold off multiple attackers. But it also left no room for retreat. A perfect last stand. He checked his stolen stun projector and activated the shield generator on his wrist. Then, almost as an afterthought, he drew the ancient crystalline sword, the Blade of Clarity. In the dim light of the corridor, the blade seemed to absorb and refract the illumination, casting prismatic patterns on the walls. The first attackers rounded the corner. 3 Kreslor mercenaries in Varelian security uniforms, weapons raised. They hesitated briefly at the sight of a lone human blocking their path, armed with what appeared to be a ceremonial sword. That hesitation cost them. Daniel's stun projector dropped 2 before they could fire, and he was in motion before the third could adjust his aim. The crystalline blade swept through the mercenary's weapon with unexpected ease, shearing it in half before the flat of the blade knocked the Kresler unconscious. More attackers arrived, a mixed group of Vareth's Varelian loyalists and additional mercenaries. This time, they were prepared, coordinating their attack to overwhelm a single defender. But Daniel wasn't fighting like a maintenance worker. His movements were precise, economical, and lethal when necessary. He used the narrow corridor to his advantage, preventing his opponents from bringing their superior numbers to bear. The shield generator absorbed energy blasts that he couldn't dodge, while the ancient sword proved unnervingly effective against modern armor and weapons. As he fought, Daniel found himself drawing on training that went beyond standard military protocols. Muscle memory from a program that officially didn't exist in Earth's records. Techniques designed specifically for humans, operating against technologically superior opponents. Behind him, the door to the Sanctum Core remained sealed, giving Solari the time she needed to activate the ancient defense systems. But Daniel knew he couldn't hold the position indefinitely. Already his shield generator was beginning to overload from repeated hits, and his stun projector's charge was running low. Then, a new figure appeared at the end of the corridor. High Chancellor Vareth himself, clad in full battle armor that gleamed with power circuits. At his side were his elite guards, equipped with weapons far more advanced than those carried by the initial attackers. "Impressive, human," Vareth called, his voice amplified by his armor. "You fight well for a species we considered barely sentient when we first encountered you." Daniel didn't waste breath on a response, conserving his energy for the battle to come. "I must admit," Vareth continued, slowly advancing, "you have proven more troublesome than anticipated. When you first arrived, I dismissed you as insignificant, another token gesture from Earth's subservient government." His silver eyes narrowed. "A mistake I won't repeat." With a gesture, Vareth signaled his guards to attack. They moved with coordinated precision, their weapons charging with lethal energy. Daniel prepared for the onslaught, knowing his chances of survival were diminishing with each passing second. But he only needed to hold a little longer, just enough time for Solari to complete the activation sequence. The first guard reached him, weapon firing. Daniel deflected the energy blast with the crystalline sword, a desperate move that shouldn't have worked but somehow did, the blade absorbing and dispersing the energy in a shower of prismatic light. Taking advantage of the guard's surprise, Daniel closed the distance and struck with the sword's pommel, dropping the Varelian to the ground. But the second and third guards were already upon him, attacking from different angles. Daniel's shield generator finally overloaded, the protective field collapsing in a cascade of energy. An instant later, a glancing hit from an energy weapon scorched his left arm, sending pain lancing through his body. He staggered back, maintaining his position before the Sanctum Core door, but clearly weakening. Vareth himself stepped forward, a cruel smile on his face. "Your resistance is futile, human. Even now, my forces are securing the palace and preparing evidence of Earth's treacherous attack. By tomorrow, your world will face the full military might of Virelia, with myself as Supreme Commander." "You underestimate Earth," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the pain. "And you underestimate your queen. Solari is a relic, like this palace, and its outdated traditions." Vareth raised his own weapon, an advanced disruptor that could reduce organic matter to its component atoms. Her devotion to peace and cooperation makes her unfit to lead Virelia into its destined place of dominance. As Vareth prepared to fire, the corridor suddenly filled with a haunting, melodic tone, different from the alarm that had sounded earlier. This sound seemed to emanate from the very walls, resonating through the living crystal of the palace itself. Vareth froze, his expression shifting from triumph to confusion. "What is this?" Behind Daniel, The door to the sanctum core slid open. Queen Solari emerged, but she was transformed. The living crystal of the core had responded to her royal connection, extending filaments that now intertwined with her silver skin, creating a glowing network of power that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. "You speak of traditions you do not understand, Vareth," Solari said, her voice resonating with the same melodic tone that filled the corridor. "You call yourself loyal to Virelia, while conspiring with mercenaries and planning war against our allies." Vareth's guards backed away involuntarily, their weapons lowering in the face of Solari's transformed presence. "The ancient defenses are awakening," Solari continued, raising her hands. The crystal walls of the corridor responded, pulsing with increasing intensity. "The palace remembers its true purpose, not as a symbol of power, but as a guardian of peace." Vareth snarled and raised his weapon again, this time aiming directly at Solari. "Peace is for the weak! Virelia deserves dominance!" He fired, a devastating blast that should have disintegrated anything in its path. But the energy dissipated harmlessly against an invisible barrier that shimmered into momentary visibility around Solari.
"The palace protects its true ruler," she said calmly.
Throughout the structure, the living crystal that formed the bones of the palace began to respond to Solari's awakened connection. Security fields activated in corridors, separating loyal forces from conspirators. Communication systems came online, broadcasting evidence of Vareth's treachery to all Virelian ships and colonies. The ancient defense network, dormant for centuries, stirred to life. Vareth's face contorted with rage. "This changes nothing. My forces still control the key systems. The Kreslar ships are still approaching, disguised as Earth vessels." "Are they?" Daniel asked, straightening despite his wounded arm. "Check your tactical display, High Chancellor." Confusion flickered across Vareth's face as he accessed the data feed in his armor. His expression shifted from confidence to shock.
"Impossible! The Kreslar ships are being intercepted?"
"Earth's defense fleet," Daniel explained. "In position for days, cloaked and waiting. Did you really think we'd send a diplomatic delegation into potentially hostile territory without protection?" Vareth's shock gave way to cold fury. He turned to Daniel, disruptor raised. You're no maintenance worker. Who are you really?" Daniel smiled thinly, shifting his stance as he raised the crystalline sword. "My name is Captain Daniel Reeve, formerly of Earth Special Operations Command. My last mission was designated Project Clean Sweep, until your Kreslar allies ambushed my team during peace negotiations 5 years ago." Recognition dawned in Vareth's eyes. "The border incident? That was your unit?" 11 of the finest soldiers Earth had ever produced, killed by Kreslar mercenaries using Virelian weapons. Weapons that you provided. Daniel's voice remained calm, but his eyes burned with cold intensity. "One survivor. Me. Left for dead on a border world with evidence that would never be believed without additional proof."
"So Earth sent you back for revenge?"
"For justice," Daniel corrected. "And to prevent the war you've been planning since that day." Vareth's laugh was cold and dismissive.
"Justice? You infiltrated our palace, manipulated our queen, and now stand with an ancient weapon you've stolen from our sacred relics. You're nothing but a spy and a thief."
"And you're a traitor to your own people," Daniel replied evenly. "How many Virelian lives would be lost in your war with Earth? How many humans would die to satisfy your ambition?" Vareth's eyes narrowed. "Acceptable losses for Virelian supremacy. Our species was meant to rule, not cooperate with lesser beings." Throughout this exchange, Solari had been silent, the crystalline network pulsing across her skin with increasing intensity. Now she spoke, her voice resonating with the power of the sanctum core. "Enough, Vareth. Your conspiracy is exposed. Your mercenary allies are being intercepted. Your loyal officers are even now being separated from the true defenders of Virelia." Vareth glanced at his tactical display again, his face hardening as he saw the truth of her words. Throughout the palace, his forces were being contained by the ancient security systems. The Kressler ships disguised as Earth vessels were engaged by the previously hidden Earth defense fleet. His carefully orchestrated coup was unraveling. But the High Chancellor was not yet defeated. With a snarl of rage, he activated a hidden function in his battle armor. Energy surged through the power circuits, transforming the ceremonial protection into a weapon system. "If I cannot rule Virelia," he growled, "then perhaps it deserves to fall." Energy blasts erupted from his armor, striking the crystal walls of the corridor. The living material shrieked in a way that suggested pain, cracks spreading from the impact points. "Stop!" Solari commanded. "The structural integrity of the sanctum level will collapse when I destroy the support nodes." Vareth finished with vicious satisfaction. "Taking you, this human spy, and the sanctum core with it. Without the core, the palace defenses will fail, and my secondary forces can still complete the mission." Daniel realized what was happening. Vareth was targeting specific points in the living crystal, points that appeared to be linked to the structural integrity of the entire lower level. If the sanctum core was destroyed, not only would Solari lose her connection to the palace defense systems, but the evidence of Vareth's conspiracy would be buried in the collapse. Without hesitation, Daniel launched himself toward Vareth, ignoring the pain from his injured arm. The crystalline sword, the blade of clarity, glowed with increasing brightness as he moved, as if responding to his intent. Vareth fired again, this time directly at Daniel. But the human was already in motion, dodging with a speed and precision that belied his injuries. The blade intercepted the energy blast, absorbing and channeling it along its crystalline structure before redirecting it harmlessly into the floor. Daniel closed the distance, the sword moving in patterns that felt strangely familiar, as if the weapon itself was guiding his hand. Vareth's armor sparked and sizzled where the blade made contact, power circuits shorting out under the impossible edge of the ancient weapon. "Impossible!" Vareth gasped, stumbling back. "That blade hasn't responded to anyone since—" "Since the Purification Wars," Solari finished, watching with evident surprise. "Since it chose the last guardian of truth." Daniel pressed his advantage, each strike of the blade disabling another section of Vareth's advanced armor. The High Chancellor's guards moved to intervene, but found themselves immobilized by crystalline formations that erupted from the walls at Solari's silent command. With a final, precise thrust, Daniel drove the blade into the central power node of Vareth's armor. The system overloaded in a cascade of energy, leaving the High Chancellor helpless, his technological advantages neutralized. Vareth fell to his knees, his once imposing armor now dead weight on his frame. He looked up at Daniel with hatred and incomprehension. "Who are you? How could a human maintenance worker defeat Virelian military technology?" Daniel lowered the sword, its glow subsiding as the immediate threat passed. "I told you, Captain Daniel Reeve, Earth Special Operations Command, sole survivor of Project Clean Sweep." "Project Clean Sweep," Solari repeated thoughtfully. "An interesting designation for a military unit." "It wasn't just a unit," Daniel explained, his eyes never leaving Vareth. "It was a diplomatic initiative disguised as a military operation. Our mission was to identify and neutralize elements within both Earth and Virelian power structures that were pushing for conflict." He gestured to Vareth with the tip of the blade. "Elements like the High Chancellor, who has been supplying advanced weapons to Kressler mercenaries and staging border incidents for years, building a case for war while positioning himself as Virelia's necessary strong leader." Vareth's silver eyes blazed with defiance. "You have no proof that would stand before the Galactic Confederation." "Don't I?" Daniel reached into a concealed pocket and withdrew a small data crystal. "Every conversation you've had in the Hall of Relics for the past 3 weeks. Every meeting with your Kressler allies. Every transmission to your military commander's positioning for the invasion. He tossed the crystal to Solari, who caught it with a graceful motion. A maintenance worker hears everything, High Chancellor, especially one who knows exactly what to listen for. The palace security forces, the true loyal guards, not Vareth's conspirators, were arriving now, responding to Solari's summons through the reactivated defense system. They surrounded Vareth and his neutralized elite guards, awaiting the Queen's command. "Take the traitor and his accomplices to the reflection chambers," Solari ordered. "They will face proper justice before the full court." As Vareth was led away, his once proud posture now broken by defeat, he turned back to Daniel. "This isn't over, human. Virelia will never accept equality with Earth. Others will continue what I began." "Perhaps," Daniel acknowledged, "but not today." When the prisoners had been removed, Solari turned to Daniel, her expression thoughtful. The crystalline network that had enhanced her connection to the palace systems was receding now, returning to the sanctum core. "Captain Reeve," she said formally, "it seems Earth's briefings were incomplete when they described you as a maintenance technician." Daniel smiled slightly. "Technical truth. Your luminance. I've been maintaining the peace. At great personal risk." She gestured to his injured arm, which was still bleeding. "You require medical attention." "I've had worse," Daniel said, though he didn't resist when she called for a medical team. As they waited, Solari studied him with her silver blue eyes. "You could have simply assassinated Vareth, given your skills and your position in the palace. You had multiple opportunities. Why this elaborate approach?" Daniel carefully set down the crystalline sword, which had returned to its dormant state. Removing Vareth wouldn't have addressed the underlying problem. His conspiracy had supporters throughout your military and diplomatic corps. Without exposing the full extent of his network, his death would have been meaningless, possibly even counterproductive. You sought systemic change, not merely revenge for your fallen comrades. "Revenge is hollow," Daniel said quietly. "Justice endures." Solari nodded slowly. "A distinction many fail to appreciate." She gestured to the sword. "The blade of clarity responded to you, something it has not done for any Virelian in 10 generations. Our legends say it recognizes truth in the heart of the wielder." "I wouldn't know about legends," Daniel replied. "I just needed a weapon." The medical team arrived, and Daniel submitted to their examination and treatment. As they worked on his injured arm, applying regenerative compounds that would accelerate healing, Solari received reports from throughout the palace and beyond. Vareth's conspiracy was being dismantled with surprising speed. The advanced security systems of the palace, reactivated from the sanctum core, had identified and isolated his supporters. The Kreslor mercenary ships, their disguise as Earth vessels now ineffective, had either surrendered or retreated when confronted by the actual Earth defense fleet. Most importantly, the Earth diplomatic delegation had been safely recovered from the detention facility where Vareth had imprisoned them, preventing the interstellar incident the High Chancellor had planned. "Your mission appears to be a success, Captain," Solari observed when they were alone again, the medical team having completed their work. "Though I suspect your superiors didn't anticipate quite this level of disruption." Daniel flexed his treated arm, testing the medical compound's effectiveness. "My operational parameters included significant latitude for improvisation." Clearly, a hint of amusement crossed Solari's face. "What happens now? Will you return to Earth as the hero who prevented an interstellar war?" "That would be counterproductive," Daniel said carefully. "My cover identity remains useful. There may be other conspirators, other threats to the peace between our worlds." Solari studied him for a long moment. "You wish to remain as a maintenance technician, even after all this?" "It's an effective role," Daniel pointed out. "No one notices the person who cleans the floors. I can continue to observe, to listen, to identify potential problems before they escalate. An unusual request for a military hero. Daniel's expression darkened slightly. I'm the sole survivor of my unit. Your luminance. The hero's welcome you imagine would be somewhat hollow. Solari considered this, then nodded slowly. Very well. Daniel Reeve will continue his duties in the Hall of Ancestral Relics, but perhaps with some adjustments to his access and authority. I would appreciate that, Daniel said. Though I should warn you, I'll still clean very thoroughly. It's become something of a habit. I would expect nothing less, Solari replied, with what might have been the ghost of a smile. In the days that followed, the Varelian court was transformed. Vareth's trial exposed the full extent of his conspiracy, revealing decades of manipulation, illegal weapons transfers, and orchestrated border incidents designed to push Earth and Varelia toward war. The evidence Daniel had gathered, combined with the confessions of Vareth's accomplices, led to a diplomatic reset between the two powers. Earth's status within the Galactic Confederation was formally elevated, with new trade agreements and cultural exchange programs established. And throughout it all, Daniel Reeve continued his maintenance duties in the Hall of Ancestral Relics. His work was exemplary, his manner quiet and respectful. If the palace staff noticed that he now had unrestricted access to areas previously forbidden to maintenance workers, or that he occasionally spent hours in private conversation with Queen Solari, they were too discreet to comment. One evening, as Daniel was completing his usual cleaning routine in the now empty hall, Solari found him polishing the display case that once again housed the Blade of Clarity. Captain, she greeted him, using his real title only when they were alone. Your luminance, he replied with a slight bow. The delegation from the Andromeda colonies seemed impressed with the hall today. They were more impressed with the new cooperation between our worlds, Solari said. Though they don't know the true architect of that piece still cleans the floors where they walk. Daniel smiled slightly. I prefer it that way. Solari moved closer, studying the ancient sword in its display. Our historians have been researching the Blade of Clarity since it responded to you during the confrontation with Vareth. Do you know what they discovered? I can only imagine, Daniel said, continuing his methodical cleaning. The blade was forged during the early days of the Purification Wars, when our civilization was torn between opposing philosophies. The records indicate it was designed to cut away deception and reveal truth. A weapon that responds not to royal bloodlines or telepathic ability, but to clarity of purpose. Daniel paused in his work, looking at the crystalline sword thoughtfully. A useful quality in uncertain times. Indeed. Solari turned from the display to face him directly. The Galactic Confederation has approved my nomination for you to receive the Star of Diplomatic Service, their highest honor for preventing interstellar conflict. That's not necessary, Daniel began, but Solari raised a hand to silence him. The award will be presented to Captain Daniel Reeve, officially listed as killed in action 5 years ago during a border incident. She continued, Your current identity remains secure, as you wished. Daniel nodded his thanks, resuming his cleaning with practiced efficiency. The Earth delegation has also submitted a proposal, Solari added. They wish to establish a permanent liaison office within the palace, officially to facilitate the new cultural exchange programs, but with additional security responsibilities. A sensible precaution, Daniel observed. They've requested that the liaison be given quarters near the Hall of Ancestral Relics, Solari continued, a hint of amusement in her voice. Apparently, they believe the hall contains valuable insights into Varelian history and culture. It does, Daniel agreed. I've learned a great deal while maintaining it. Solari watched him work for a moment longer, then asked the question that had clearly been on her mind. Will you ever return to Earth, Captain? Surely your mission here must eventually conclude. Daniel paused, considering the question carefully. Earth sent me to uncover a conspiracy and prevent a war. I've accomplished that objective. But maintaining peace requires constant vigilance. He gestured to his cleaning supplies, with a slight smile. The filth never stops accumulating. Someone has to sweep it away. An unusual philosophy for a decorated military officer, Solari observed. Perhaps. Daniel finished polishing the display case to a perfect shine, then gathered his cleaning supplies. But I've found it effective. As he turned to leave, Solari spoke once more. The court chamberlain has suggested creating a new position, Master of Palace Security. The role would involve regular inspection of all palace systems, unrestricted access to all areas, and direct reporting to the throne. Daniel paused, looking back at her with raised eyebrows. Of course, Solari continued. Such a position would be ceremonial in nature. The actual day-to-day security would remain with the traditional guard forces. A ceremonial position, Daniel repeated thoughtfully. Indeed. The Master of Palace Security might, for instance, continue his maintenance duties as cover for his true responsibilities. Solari's expression remained neutral, but her eyes held a hint of challenge. If such an arrangement would be acceptable. Daniel considered the offer, understanding its implications. Not just continued access to the palace, but official recognition of his role as Solari's trusted advisor on security matters, while maintaining the low profile that made him so effective. I believe that could work, he said finally, though I would request one condition. And that is? Daniel gestured to his cleaning supplies. I keep my own equipment. The standard issue mops are substandard. For the first time since he had known her, Queen Solari laughed, a sound like crystal chimes in a gentle breeze. Granted, Captain Reeve. I would expect nothing less from the most thorough cleaner in the history of the royal palace. As they walked together through the now empty hall, Daniel reflected on the strange path that had brought him here. He had come seeking justice for fallen comrades and prevention of a war that would have devastated both worlds. He had found something more, a purpose that transcended his original mission, and perhaps even the beginning of understanding between two civilizations that had viewed each other with suspicion for too long. The journey had begun with a broom and a notebook. It had led to a throne room and a battlefield. And now, improbably, it had brought him to a new role that combined both, guardian and servant, warrior and maintenance worker, visible and invisible as each situation required. Daniel smiled slightly as he followed the Queen of Virelia through the gleaming corridors he had polished to perfection. Sometimes, the most effective weapon was not a sword or an energy blaster, but a simple mop and the willingness to use it. As Solari had observed, the filth never truly stopped accumulating, but someone had to sweep it away. And Daniel Reeve was very, very good at cleaning.